Hello world, welcome to Thoughts with an Accent. And here we talk about life in the modern world, how we humans think and behave in today's reality, and why. Hi guys, welcome back, or just welcome if you're new here. Today we'll be talking about how we talk. Having a conversation is something really natural. We all do it every day, and yet we don't always think about what exactly goes into a conversation, what makes it easy or difficult to have a chat with somebody, and how coming from different backgrounds, from different cultures or languages can make things different. A few months ago, I was driving back after picking my kids up from school, and they were in the back seats. I was driving, so I wasn't really actively participating in the conversation that they were having. But I heard them chatting, and it was interesting because my son is 8 and my daughter is 4. She was telling him about her day, and I didn't sort of notice it straight away, but then the more I paid attention, the more it was, I wouldn't say surprising, but quite interesting to me that he was recognizing her emotion. He was saying, wow, that must be really interesting, or that sounds like fun. And then he would add questions based on what she was saying to contribute to that conversation and to lead it somewhere. And he is a kid. I know that you might think, oh, things like that happen naturally, but I think I learned quite a few of those conversation elements only when I was an adult and only when I was exposed to a number of different languages. That's why I thought talking about it, unpacking what goes into a good conversation, what can create problems. So I thought that would be something interesting to discuss. Because, we've all been there. We've all had conversations that just didn't flow. We were misunderstood. We misunderstood somebody. Why does that even happen? Now, any conversation has a number of elements. First of all, it's, of course, language, the same linguistic means, words, phrases, grammar, register, whether it's formal or informal, the way we address the other person. There is also body language, the way we stand, the amount of space that we give to the other person. My favorite component, turn taking. If you're talking to one or more people, how do you know when to start or stop talking, and how do you take turns in that conversation? We don't think about it much, but again, I imagine everybody has been in a situation when you feel that somebody's talking too much, somebody's not talking enough, or somebody struggles to jump into the conversation. So all those things are connected with turn taking. And there's, of course, pragmatics, which is something that we read between the lines. It's how context contributes to the meaning. It's that the meaning behind the words that can be perceived differently. Okay, let's talk about all that in more detail. We're not going to discuss languages in this podcast. No, we won't talk about vocabulary or grammar, how that differs. Maybe we'll leave it for another time. But let's think about turn taking. When I was teaching English, I spent about 8 years working for different language schools in my professional life, teaching English as a foreign language in Russia and in Spain. And you might think, oh, it's easy, you just present a particular piece of language to people, they learn it, they memorize it, and then they use it. But it's not that easy. When you put people in pairs or in groups to discuss something, then you hear a lot of awkward pauses. Well, I will be talking about Russian-speaking students this time, because Spanish people don't have a problem talking. They will be talking all at the same time and somehow managing to understand what the others are saying. That's a whole different story. And that is also a cultural bit about turn taking. So people with Russian-speaking background, they have a more distinct, I'd say, turn-taking approach. So, for example, when I was growing up, I was more used to having clear roles in a conversation. One person is talking, the other is listening. Then the first person stops, or the intonation goes down, which indicates the end of the thought. And then maybe they give you a particular body language gesture. Maybe they look at you in a particular way, which means that now it's your turn to talk. And I was so used to that. So when I started learning English and using it in my life, I was in my late teens, it was not easy to just have a conversation, because I was looking for that cue. When do I start speaking? When I was in the States, when I was 18, I was in a group of people who from different English-speaking countries, and we were having a chat. There were like 4 or 5 of us, and I was waiting for that pause to start talking, but it never happened, because I was waiting for somebody, almost, I know it sounds artificial, but I was waiting for somebody to turn to me and say, "And you," and suggest that now is my turn. But it doesn't happen like that, does it? So we add bits of conversation as we go, and then again, we try to catch those signals from people we're talking to, and then contribute when the time is right. But reading those signals and knowing when the time is right is really tricky if you didn't grow up, if you don't have experience with that particular environment. So if you have any experience of talking to people, let's say from Eastern Europe, you might notice that sometimes they're just quiet and they look at you and you think, oh, do they understand? Are they following what I'm saying? The truth is, they probably are, but that's how they show respect. That's how they show that they're listening, by being quiet, and because that's their role at the moment. While in English, what I see more of is a number of tools that you can use to show that you're following the conversation. You can nod, you can say things like, "Oh, that's wonderful, that's crazy," contributing to that flow, showing your understanding. At the end of the day, we have chats so that we could exchange information and maybe work out something together as a result. So keeping that goal in mind, we need to make sure that everybody involved understands what we talk about. Or, you might as well lose somebody halfway through and then they're like, "Oh, what did you say?" The principles of turn-taking were described by sociologists in the 1970s. And the studies didn't really reveal different approaches. So the studies concluded that in all the cultures and languages that participated in the studies, the general approach to turn-taking in a conversation is the same. So we all wait for our turn this or that way. There are particular signals that we look for. So there isn't anything very different. What differs, though, is the response time. And Scandinavian languages, like Danish, for example, shows the longest response time, about just under 500 milliseconds, which is half a second. And the shortest time between turns was shown by Japanese, which was only 7 milliseconds. So there are some differences like that. When we look at research describing turn-taking, usually there are 2 types of overlap, when people talking, how their lines overlap. So we deal with cooperative overlap and competitive overlap. In competitive overlap, we see the dominance in a conversation. One person leads it or holds the dominating position, and the other person is trying to get their power back and jump in and start talking. The cooperative overlap is when one person is talking and the other person is trying to clarify something or to add something to the conversation. And this is what I was observing with my son and daughter, when my son was trying to clarify what my daughter was saying, and he was building up the conversation by showing that he was listening to her, by clarifying and asking questions about her day. So it was all building up on the same subject rather than them trying to dominate the chat. And those cooperative overlaps can be different. They can be in the form of questions. They can be in the form of small interjections like, oh, wow, things like that. But we need to be very careful here, because what's considered an interjection in one culture, in one environment, can be rude and considered an interruption in another environment. This is something to look out for. And when you walk into the room, or when you are in a group of people, you need to learn to read the room, how they use interjections. Does it feel like an interruption? Does it feel rude? What is the general dynamic? Are people building on each other's words? Are they cooperating? Is it a cooperative overlap, or is it competitive overlap? Are they trying to just talk over each other and basically turn a dialogue into an exchange of monologues? The dynamics have a lot of different scenarios. So, and these are the things to think about if you want to have a productive conversation with somebody, or an enjoyable conversation with somebody. Those little peculiarities can also be turn-taking tools. If somebody uses interjections, that can be their way to jump in and start their turn. Or it can be eye contact. When somebody invites you to talk, it could be body language. It could be laughter. Sometimes when people talk and somebody makes a joke and then they laugh, then the other person kind of continues the laughter, also going ha 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 ha, and then starting something of their own. So that can be a non-awkward way of taking your turn in a chat. Another interesting element of a conversation is pragmatics. This is when we don't always mean what we say. So it's not always that direct meaning of a phrase or a word, but it's the context that contributes to that. You know how if you have a guest and they're staying for a bit too long, and then you're checking the time, or you're asking, oh, what time is it? You're not really checking the time, but what you're saying is that, oh, it's probably too late and it's time to go home. So that is pragmatics. And you need to be aware of a certain culture, a certain environment to read into that. I'll give you an example of different mismatches that can exist in different languages and cultures. If in Russian somebody says, oh, you should come over and stay with us sometimes, if you have friends living in different places, oh, you should come visit, you should come stay, it actually means that. It actually means that you can come and stay with those people. It's not just a polite thing to say. But I have a feeling that, for example, in Britain, if somebody said, oh, you should come visit, it doesn't always mean that. It's depending on how close you are, this is another factor to take into account when you're having a conversation with somebody. I think if you're saying something to a Russian-speaking person, there is a high chance that they will take things literally. Or another example of pragmatics is when somebody says, yeah, let's get together for a coffee sometime. Does that actually mean that people are planning on messaging you and arrange a coffee? Most likely, no. And everybody kind of knows that, I think, unless you're very specific with your message and say, okay, how about let's check next week and find the time, and there are so many things like that. I think British culture in particular has loads of that. And I've spoken to a lot of British people who say, I don't know why we are not speaking, we're not saying openly what we actually mean. Sometimes it creates a bit of confusion, but that is the code of British conversations. You read between the lines. You look for such things as intonation, pauses, again, eye contact, to actually understand what the person means. So let's sum up everything that I've talked about today and try to make some sense out of it. Conversations are complex systems of language, body language, gestures, eye contact, timing, in phrases, turn taking, context, and a lot of things. So being aware of them and keeping them in mind can help you build a more effective conversation. The second thing is always try to remember what the goal of the conversation is. Are you having a debate? Are you trying to find the common ground? Are you discussing something? Are you trying to exchange the information about, how your weekend went? Keep that in mind when choosing the style and the type of your contribution to the conversation. If it's something you're working on together, if you're exchanging information, be supportive, contribute to that, be cooperative with the other person. If you're building a relationship, so facts maybe matter less, but your manner of talking matters more. And the willingness of the other person to talk to you again will depend on that. So keep that in mind and use your conversational tools effectively. Try to be aware of cultural, personal, and contextual differences. And if you're feeling too lost, ask questions. It's always better to leave the conversation having a clear understanding of what happened rather than feeling confused and not knowing what happens next. If you managed to get to this point, thank you very much for listening. Please let me know in the comments on YouTube, if you're watching it, what kind of interesting conversations you had that left you fulfilled, excited, or confused and lost. Let me know what you think. Follow me on Instagram and other podcast platforms. And don't forget to tune in for the next episode. Bye.